Nicole pressed her fingers against the silver fabric of her dress, feeling the cold sequins slide beneath her palms as she watched her reflection in the hotel room mirror. 3 months of planning for this moment. 3 months choosing every detail, from the exact shade of her makeup to the precise angle of her hairstyle. Tonight, in the grand ballroom of the San Francisco Fairmont, would be her declaration to the world. She was no longer the woman in the shadows. She was Stephen's choice. Her phone vibrated on the marble vanity. A message from him. "Arriving in 10 minutes. You're going to dazzle everyone." A smile curved her lips as Nicole applied another layer of gloss. Dazzle. Yes, that was precisely the intention. For 2 years she had been patient, understanding, present. While Diana, the wife Stephen swore he was about to leave, remained in the Pacific Heights mansion with his surname and their social appearances, Nicole waited in her Nob Hill apartment, accepting late-night dinners and stolen weekends. But all of that would end today. Stephen had promised. After the winter ball, after they appeared together at the San Francisco elite's most important event, he would finally file for divorce. There would be no more excuses about timing or protecting the family business. Her presence by his side tonight would be the silent yet definitive announcement. Nicole picked up her silver clutch and walked to the hotel window, watching the city lights twinkle like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Down below, in Union Square, tourists strolled unhurriedly, oblivious to the dramas unfolding on the upper floors of the luxury hotels. Oblivious to the fact that, in a few hours, Nicole Ashford's life would change forever. The knock on the door came precisely at 7, as Stephen had promised. He entered in an impeccable tuxedo, the silver at his temples giving him that distinguished look that had attracted Nicole from day one. At 52, Stephen Carmichael commanded not only one of Silicon Valley's largest tech companies, but also a presence that dominated any room he entered. "You're perfect," he said, his eyes scanning every inch of her with an appreciation that made Nicole feel powerful. "We are perfect," she corrected, straightening his tie even though there was no need. It was the kind of intimate gesture couples made, and Nicole wanted to practice. Soon, these gestures would be natural, public, legitimate. During the drive in Stephen's black Tesla, Nicole watched the city slide past the window. They passed Lombard Street with its impossible curves, the Victorian elegance of Alamo Square, until they arrived at the imposing Fairmont, crowning Nob Hill like a modern castle. Uniformed valets rushed to open their doors. Society photographers lined the entrance. "Ready?" Stephen asked, extending his hand. Nicole took a deep breath and accepted it. The flash of cameras exploded around them as they ascended the steps. She maintained her practiced smile, her chin at the angle that best flattered her cheekbones, her shoulders back. Some people in line to enter whispered. Nicole caught fragments. "Not the wife." "I heard that." "Finally in public." "Perfect. Let them talk. Let everyone know." The interior of the grand ballroom was breathtaking even for those accustomed to luxury. 19th-century crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling in cascades of light. Floral arrangements the size of shrubs dotted each table, white roses and hydrangeas creating small, fragrant forests. The orchestra occupied the stage at the far end, already playing something classical and elegant that Nicole couldn't identify. She knew this world only from Stephen's stories. Charity dinners where a single plate cost $5,000. Silent auctions of artworks that funded children's hospitals. The San Francisco elite gathered to celebrate their own generosity in designer gowns and jewelry worth more than houses. "Stephen, what a surprise to see you here." A platinum-haired woman approached, her eyes traveling from Stephen to Nicole with ill-disguised curiosity. and with company. Margaret, let me introduce Nicole Ashford. Nicole, this is Margaret Chen from the Asian Art Museum Board. Nicole extended her hand with rehearsed grace. A pleasure. Stephen has told me about the wonderful work you do. Margaret squeezed her hand with calculated firmness, a polite smile frozen on her face. How interesting. Where is Diana tonight, Stephen? Diana has her own engagements, Stephen replied, with a smoothness that invited no further questions. But the questions would come, Nicole knew. Over the next hour, as they circulated through the ballroom, she felt the stares, heard the whispers that abruptly ceased as they approached. Stephen introduced her with confidence, his hand always on her lower back, a possessive gesture that declared ownership. Nicole greeted CEOs and philanthropists, judges and heiresses. She laughed at the right times, showed genuine interest in conversations about startup investments and educational reforms. She was charming, intelligent, appropriate. Everything she had practiced being. You're doing wonderfully, Stephen murmured in her ear as they headed to their designated table. Better than I imagined. Better than Diana, he meant. Nicole caught the subtext and warmed to it. Their table was strategically positioned, not at the very front, but close enough to signal importance. Nicole recognized some of the other occupants, a couple who owned wineries in Napa, a real estate developer known for transforming entire neighborhoods, a plastic surgeon whose work was whispered about in reverent tones in Union Square spas. Dinner was served on porcelain plates with gilded edges, wild Alaskan salmon with pea puree and pencil-thin asparagus. Nicole ate small portions, conscious of how the silver dress hugged every curve. Conversation flowed around the table, shifting from local politics to international travel, from real estate markets to the latest starred restaurant openings. Nicole contributed when appropriate, but mostly she watched Stephen. He was in his element, commanding attention with stories about his company's next product launch, making others laugh with anecdotes about Silicon Valley meetings. This was the man she loved, not just the Stephen who appeared at her apartment at 10 at night, exhausted and needing solace, but this Stephen, confident and magnetic. Between courses, couples began to circulate again, visiting other tables. Nicole was in the middle of a conversation about the merits of public transit system reform when she felt Stephen tense beside her. She followed his gaze to the ballroom entrance. The ballroom didn't exactly fall silent, but something shifted in the atmosphere. A ripple of attention that began at the entrance and spread like circles on water. The orchestra hesitated, a few notes faltering before recovering. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. Diana Carmichael had arrived. Nicole had only seen her in photographs, images Stephen reluctantly kept in their house for appearances. But no photograph had adequately captured the presence of the woman now sweeping across the ballroom in a scarlet-red dress that seemed liquid over her elegant silhouette. Diana did not rush. There was no nervousness in her movements. She floated through the sea of tables with the confidence of one who knew every person in that room, who had dined in their homes and contributed to their causes. Her dark hair was pulled back into a low bun that exposed a long neck and a diamond necklace that caught the light from the chandeliers like individual stars. But it wasn't the dress or the jewelry that held attention. It was the man by her side, Alessandro Monteverdi. Nicole recognized the Italian conductor instantly, his photograph having appeared on the cover of the San Francisco Symphony magazine the previous month. He was younger than Diana, perhaps 40, with features that could have been sculpted by Michelangelo and a charisma that rivaled even Stephen's. Nicole felt something cold settle in her stomach as she watched Diana stop at table after table. greeted with warm hugs and kisses on the cheeks. Genuine laughter followed in her wake. The conductor remained by her side, his hand resting lightly on her back, exactly as Stephen did with Nicole. But when Stephen touched Nicole, it felt like a declaration. When Monteverde touched Diana, it felt like poetry. The red of Diana's dress should have been a warning. Nicole realized it too late, as she was trapped in her seat, watching Stephen's legitimate wife transform the entire ballroom into her personal stage. It wasn't just the vibrant color against the sea of neutral and metallic tones the other women wore. It was the way Diana wore it, as if she had been born in that fabric, as if the scarlet red were an extension of her own skin. Nicole gripped her champagne flute hard enough for her knuckles to turn white. Beside her, Stephen had regained his composure after the initial moment of tension, his expression returning to the mask of polished indifference he wore in difficult business meetings. But Nicole noticed how his eyes followed Diana across the ballroom, like a compass unable to avoid pointing north. "She shouldn't be here," Stephen murmured, more to himself than to Nicole. "She said she was spending the night in Carmel with friends." Nicole forced her words to come out calmly. "Apparently, she changed her plans." The real estate developer at their table, a woman named Patricia, with mahogany hair and eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Diana is absolutely radiant tonight, and with Alessandro Monteverde, no less. Did you know he's staying at the Carmichael estate in Pacific Heights?" Diana mentioned at last week's charity tea that they were collaborating on some cultural project. Nicole felt each word like tiny daggers. Staying at the estate. The mansion Stephen shared with Diana. The house he swore was just a formality, a convenient address maintained for appearances. And now there was an Italian conductor staying there, accompanying his wife to the winter ball where Stephen had promised to make his grand public declaration with Nicole. "Alessandro is on a West Coast tour," Stephen explained in a controlled voice. "Diana has always been a patron of the arts. It makes sense that she would offer hospitality to someone brought in by the symphony." Patricia took a deliberate sip of wine. "Oh, it's far more than hospitality. I heard Diana is organizing a special private concert. Something intimate on Alcatraz, can you believe it? With the entire island reserved for just 100 select guests. Absolutely brilliant. Only Diana would think of something like that." Nicole watched Stephen process this information, saw the muscle in his jaw clench. So he didn't know. His wife was planning elaborate events, spending what would surely be a fortune, hosting international celebrities, all without consulting him. The dynamic Stephen had described to Nicole, of a dead marriage where he and Diana lived separate lives under the same roof, was beginning to seem less factual and more interpretive. Diana still hadn't looked her way. She continued her regal progress through the ballroom, stopping to greet a couple here, embrace a woman there. Every person she encountered lit up, as if Diana's attention were a rare gift. The conductor remained by her side, his presence adding an extra layer of glamour. But Nicole realized he didn't overshadow Diana. If anything, he reflected her light, like the moon reflects the sun. "We need to leave," Nicole whispered to Stephen. This was a mistake. But before Stephen could respond, the orchestra stopped playing. The conductor, an elderly man with impeccable posture, descended from the stage and walked directly to Diana and Alessandro. Conversations around the ballroom hushed again as everyone watched the interaction. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conductor's voice echoed through the sound system, "we have a wonderful surprise this evening. Maestro Alessandro Monteverde has graciously agreed to conduct 2 pieces for us. Please join me in welcoming this extraordinary virtuoso." The applause was instant and enthusiastic. Alessandro kissed Diana's hand before ascending the stage, his movements graceful and confident. Diana finally moved towards a table at the front, the main table where the event organizers were seated. Of course, she wasn't just a guest. She was part of the organizing committee. How had Nicole not realized this before? Alessandro took the baton from the older conductor and turned to the orchestra. A moment of absolute silence filled the grand ballroom. Then he raised his hands, and the music began. Nicole was no classical music expert, but even she could recognize something extraordinary when she heard it. The notes flowed through the ballroom like something alive, filling every space, touching something deep in the chest of every person present. Alessandro moved with the music, his entire body involved in the act of conducting it, and the orchestra responded as if under a spell. But it wasn't Alessandro whom Nicole watched. Her eyes were fixed on Diana, sitting at the front table with perfect posture, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Diana's eyes were closed, a small smile curving her lips as she absorbed every note. There was something deeply intimate in that moment, as if Diana and the music were one, as if she were in a world where mundane problems like unfaithful husbands and ambitious mistresses simply didn't exist. She always loved classical music, Stephen said softly, his voice carrying a nostalgia that made Nicole's stomach churn. When we got married, we used to go to the symphony every week. It was our tradition. Our tradition. It hadn't been her obsession or that boring thing she liked. Our tradition. Nicole swallowed the bitter taste in her throat. The first piece ended with a sustained note that seemed to float in the air for an eternal moment before dissolving. The applause was deafening. People rose, offering a standing ovation. Alessandro bowed, then extended his hand towards Diana's table, gesturing to her. Diana rose gracefully and waved, and the applause somehow grew even louder. Patricia leaned in again, her voice cutting through the noise. Diana was the one who brought Alessandro to San Francisco. She met him in Milan last year, during that international art conference, convinced the symphony to include him in the season. The woman has contacts all over the world. Nicole forced a smile. Fascinating. But it wasn't fascinating. It was devastating. Every detail that emerged painted a portrait of Diana that completely contradicted the version Stephen had sold. This wasn't a neglected wife, lonely in an empty mansion, waiting for crumbs of attention. This was a woman with her own vibrant life, her own connections, her own triumphs. This was a woman who didn't need Stephen at all. So why was she still married to him? The second piece began, something more tempestuous and dramatic. Alessandro conducted with broader movements, his body practically dancing on stage. Nicole watched Stephen watch Diana watch Alessandro, and the geometry of that triangulation made her feel simultaneously invisible and far too exposed. A waitress passed by, offering more champagne. Nicole took a glass and emptied it in 3 long gulps. The alcohol burned pleasantly, blunting the sharp edges of her rising panic. She had imagined this night so many times. In her fantasies, she and Stephen entered together, beautiful and in love. And people whispered about how well matched they were, how natural their union seemed. If Diana appeared in her fantasies, it was as a diminished figure, easily eclipsed, quickly forgotten. Reality was proving cruelly different. When the second piece ended, the applause was even more intense. Alessandro descended from the stage directly to Diana, taking both her hands in his and saying something that made her eyes sparkle. Photographers Nicole hadn't noticed before materialized, capturing the moment. Tomorrow, These images would be on every San Francisco social blog, in every society column. And where would Nicole be in those photos? Somewhere in the background, out of focus, irrelevant. "Dance with me," Stephen said suddenly, rising and extending his hand. The orchestra had returned to its regular program, playing something soft and inviting to dance to. Couples were already moving towards the center of the ballroom. Nicole hesitated, then accepted Stephen's hand. Perhaps this would salvage the night. Perhaps if people saw them dance, close and connected, it would reaffirm what they had come here to do. Stephen led her onto the dance floor and pulled her into his arms. They began to move to the rhythm of the music, and for a moment, Nicole closed her eyes and tried to reclaim the fantasy. This was what she wanted. Stephen's arms around her, his familiar scent, the solidity of his chest against hers. But when she opened her eyes, she saw Diana and Alessandro also on the dance floor, just a few feet away. Diana moved as if she had been born dancing. Every step was precise, but not rigid, flowing naturally from one movement to the next. Alessandro led her with professional skill, and together they created something that felt more like a performance than a social dance. Other people stopped to watch. A circle began to form around them. Nicole stumbled, stepping on Stephen's foot. "Sorry," she murmured. Stephen didn't even seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on his wife, watching her spin in another man's arms with an expression Nicole couldn't fully decipher. There was pain there, certainly, but there was also something more. Admiration? Regret? Desire? The music ended. Alessandro spun Diana one last time, and her red dress billowed around her like flames. Spontaneous applause erupted again. Diana smiled, flushed and radiant, and made a graceful bow. Nicole felt Stephen pull away, his hands dropping from her sides. He was crossing the dance floor, moving towards Diana with a determination that seemed half unconscious. Nicole felt the world tilt slightly as she watched Stephen cross the dance floor towards Diana. Each step of his seemed to happen in slow motion, each movement a confirmation of what she had tried to ignore for 2 entire years. The silver fabric of her dress suddenly looked cheap under the lights, the sequins no longer sophisticated, but desperate. A fragile attempt to shine in a ballroom where Diana emanated her own light without needing artifice. Alessandro noticed Stephen first. The conductor subtly straightened, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert, like a predator recognizing another in his territory. But Diana simply turned, her red dress swirling with the movement, and met her husband's eyes with a calm that was more devastating than any dramatic confrontation could be. "Stephen," she said, her voice carrying across the space between them with perfect clarity. There was no surprise in that tone, no anger, just simple recognition, as if she were greeting a casual acquaintance instead of the man with whom she had shared 23 years of marriage. Nicole forced her legs to move, following Stephen through the sea of curious glances. She could feel every pair of eyes in the ballroom on them now, all polite conversations temporarily suspended as the San Francisco elite waited to see how this particular scene would unfold. Her heart beat so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, a frantic drum of growing panic and humiliation. "Diana," Stephen replied as Nicole reached his side, "I didn't expect you here." Clearly. Diana's eyes slid to Nicole with clinical interest, the kind of look one might give a painting in a gallery, appreciating the technical composition without any emotional connection to the subject. "Though I suppose I should have expected you to bring company." The word hung in the air between them. Company? Not girlfriend, not partner. Company, as if Nicole were something temporary and interchangeable, an accessory Stephen had rented for the evening and would return by morning. Alessandro stepped forward, his hand finding Diana's elbow in a protective gesture that seemed both possessive and respectful. "Diana, perhaps we should find our table. The next course will be served shortly." "In a moment, Alessandro." Diana held Stephen's gaze, and Nicole perceived something pass between them, some silent communication built on decades of shared history. "You look well, Stephen. The company is thriving, I presume?" Formality was a weapon. Nicole understood that now, watching how each polite word from Diana created more distance, how each civil phrase established barriers that couldn't be crossed without seeming rude or desperate. "Very well," Stephen replied, regaining some of his usual composure. "And I see you've kept yourself busy." Patricia mentioned something about a concert on Alcatraz. A genuine smile curved Diana's lips, transforming her face from merely beautiful to utterly luminous. "Yes, it's going to be intimate but spectacular. Alessandro has graciously agreed to perform. Only 100 guests, all significant contributors to the symphony. You received your invitation, I'm sure. I made certain Margaret included you on the list." The blow was subtle but precise. Diana had organized an exclusive, highly coveted event, and ensured Stephen received an invitation not as her husband, but as just another important name on the guest list. She had reduced him from life partner to potential donor. Nicole watched Stephen's jaw tighten. "I didn't receive an invitation." "No." Diana tilted her head, perfectly staged confusion crossing her face. "How odd. Well, consider yourself invited now. It's in 2 weeks, on Saturday. Sunset cocktails, then music under the stars. It's going to be unforgettable." She paused, her eyes briefly sliding to Nicole before returning to Stephen. "The invitation is for you, of course. Individual seating has been carefully arranged." "Individual seating. Don't bring your girlfriend." Nicole felt her cheeks burn. The real estate developer Patricia chose that moment to materialize beside them, her smile too wide to be innocent. "Diana, what a magnificent entrance you made. And Alessandro, your conducting was transcendent, absolutely transcendent." "Patricia, dear," Diana kissed both the older woman's cheeks. "Thank you for coming, and for your incredible efforts organizing the tables. Everything looks perfect." "Well, I learn from the best." Patricia winked. "You should have seen her face when she suggested turning Alcatraz into a concert hall. I thought you'd lost your mind, but now that I see it come to fruition, it's pure genius." Other people were gravitating towards the group now, drawn by Diana's magnetism or perhaps by the promise of witnessing some gossip-worthy social drama. A woman in navy velvet commented on Diana's dress. A distinguished man with a British accent asked Alessandro about his European tour. A younger couple pressed Diana for details about her upcoming fundraiser for a homeless housing initiative. Nicole stood at the periphery of this expanding circle, invisible despite her silver sequins, silent as conversation flowed around her like water around a stone. Stephen remained by her side, but his attention was clearly elsewhere, his eyes following Diana as she laughed and gestured, completely in her element. It was Alessandro who finally offered Nicole any recognition. He stepped away from the main discussion and extended his hand. "I apologize. We haven't been introduced. Alessandro Monteverdi." "Nicole Ashford." She shook his hand, grateful for even this small gesture of inclusion. "Are you enjoying the evening?" His eyes were kind, non-judgmental, and Nicole wondered how much he knew about the situation. Surely Diana had mentioned something about her unfaithful husband. "It's different from what I expected," Nicole admitted, choosing her words carefully. Alessandro smiled, a small, knowing gesture. San Francisco events often are. The city has a way of subverting expectations. He paused, then added lower, Diana told me a little about your complicated situation. If it's any consolation, these things rarely unfold the way anyone imagines. Before Nicole could respond, Diana materialized beside Alessandro, her presence instantly shifting the dynamic. Alessandro, we really should return to our table. The organizers are waving frantically. Of course. Alessandro offered his arm, and Diana accepted it with natural grace. It was good to see you, Stephen, Diana said, her tone polite but final. Nicole, lovely to meet you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And then she was gone, gliding through the crowd with Alessandro, leaving a trail of admiring glances and whispered conversations in her wake. The red dress flickered among the other guests like a flame moving through a forest at night. Impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. Stephen remained motionless for a long moment, watching his wife walk away. When he finally turned to Nicole, there was something broken in his expression, a fissure in the confident veneer he always maintained. We should go back to our table, he said, but made no move to move. Nicole touched his arm. Stephen, we need to talk about this. Not here. His voice was tight, controlled. Not now. But when then? Nicole wanted to scream. When would they have this conversation that was 2 years overdue? When would Stephen finally admit that perhaps his marriage to Diana wasn't as dead as he claimed? That perhaps the woman in red who had just transformed an entire ballroom into her personal stage wasn't the neglected, lonely wife he had described, but someone entirely different, someone vibrant and connected and perfectly capable of thriving without him. They returned to their table in silence. The plastic surgeon was in the middle of a story about a procedure that had hilariously gone wrong. The winery couple discussed climate change affecting grape harvests. Patricia watched Nicole and Stephen with calculating eyes that missed no detail. Nicole took another glass of champagne from a passing waitress. Then another. The alcohol created a pleasant barrier between her and reality, blunting the edges of humiliation, softening the rising pain in her chest. She had been so stupid, so gullible. Stephen had painted a portrait of an empty marriage, a wife who had emotionally abandoned him, a relationship that existed only on paper. And she had believed him because wanting to believe was easier than asking the difficult questions. Across the ballroom, Diana and Alessandro sat at the main table, engaged in conversation with the event organizers. Even from a distance, Nicole could see how people leaned towards Diana, how they gravitated into her orbit. It wasn't just beauty or wealth or social status. It was something deeper, an authenticity that couldn't be faked or bought. Dessert was served, some elaborate chocolate creation that was probably sublime, but tasted like ashes in Nicole's mouth. Stephen ate mechanically, contributing to the table conversation when necessary, but Nicole could feel his distraction, could see his eyes wandering repeatedly to that front table, to that red dress. When the music resumed, couples returned to the dance floor. Stephen didn't ask Nicole to dance again. He remained seated, swirling his glass of bourbon, lost in thoughts she couldn't access. Nicole watched Diana and Alessandro dance once more, their movements perfectly synchronized, and understood with sudden, brutal clarity that she had lost a competition she hadn't known she was participating in until it was too late. The limousine Stephen had rented for the evening waited at the circular entrance of the Fairmont, its black paint reflecting the hotel's golden lights like a distorted mirror. Nicole followed Stephen inside, her silver dress whispering against the leather as she sank into the seat, creating distance between them for the first time that night. The driver closed the door with a soft click, sealing them in a silence that felt denser than the air itself. Stephen didn't look at her. his eyes fixed on the window, watching San Francisco slide by in a blur of lights as they descended Nob Hill. Nicole could see his reflection in the glass, his jaw tight, the line between his brows deep with concentration, or perhaps regret. She waited for him to speak first, prepared for anything except this heavy silence that turned every unfilled second into an accusation. Finally, as they passed the Embarcadero, with its views of the illuminated Bay Bridge, Nicole couldn't bear it anymore. "Are you going to pretend that didn't happen?" Stephen turned slowly, as if coming out of a trance. "What do you want me to say?" The truth would be a start. Nicole felt her voice rise, 2 years of pent-up frustrations threatening to spill over. "You told me Diana had given up on you, that she lived her own life and barely noticed when you were home. That woman tonight didn't look like someone who had given up on anything." "You don't understand the situation." "Then make me understand." Nicole leaned forward, her hands clenching into fists in her lap. "Explain to me how the neglected wife you described became the absolute star of that ball. Tell me why she brought an internationally famous conductor as her escort. Help me understand why every single person in that room seemed to adore her while barely knowing I existed." Stephen ran a hand through his hair, disarranging his carefully styled coiffure. "Diana has always been good at social events. It's a skill of hers, creating public performances. It means nothing about the real state of our marriage." "Performance?" Nicole let out a short, bitter laugh. "That wasn't a performance, Stephen. That was someone living their life fully, someone connected and engaged and completely comfortable in her own skin. That's the woman you claim to be trapped in a dead marriage with." The limousine turned right, heading towards the Nob Hill neighborhood where Nicole's apartment was located. The streets here were narrower, lined with meticulously preserved Victorian buildings that bore witness to decades of San Francisco history. Nicole had chosen this apartment partly for its proximity to Stephen's mansion in Pacific Heights, imagining a future where the distance between them would shrink until it disappeared completely. Now that distance felt like an insurmountable chasm. "Diana and I have a history," Stephen said finally, his voice carrying a weight Nicole hadn't heard before. 23 years of marriage don't just disappear because 2 people grow in different directions. She built her life around charitable causes and social events because I was always working, always focused on the company. What you saw tonight was the result of years of neglect on my part." "So you admit you neglected her?" "I admit I wasn't the husband she deserved." Stephen finally met Nicole's eyes, and she saw something vulnerable there, something he rarely showed. "But that doesn't change the fact that we grew apart. We share a home, we share history, but we no longer share a real life." Nicole wanted to believe him. Part of her still clung to the promises Stephen had made, to the reassurances whispered during late nights in her apartment when the outside world seemed distant and irrelevant. But another part of her, the part that had watched Diana command that ballroom with absolute grace, that had seen the way Stephen's eyes followed his wife across the dance floor, knew that Stephen's narrative was incomplete at best. "And Alessandro?" Nicole pressed. "He's staying at your house, Stephen. Your wife is hosting elaborate events with him. How does that fit into your dead marriage?" "Alessandro is a professional contact of Diana's. She's always supported the arts. Don't treat me like an idiot." Nicole felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I saw how he looked at her. I saw how she glowed when they danced together. There's something going on there." Stephen remained silent for so long that Nicole thought he wouldn't answer. The limousine pulled up in front of her building, an Art Deco edifice with elegant detailing that she had chosen because it seemed sophisticated, worthy of the partner of a successful tech CEO. Now it just looked lonely, a gilded cage where she waited for a man who perhaps had never truly been hers. "You want me to be honest?" Stephen said finally. "I don't know what's going on between Diana and Alessandro. I don't know how long she's been planning that Alcatraz concert, or when she decided she was ready to appear publicly with another man. And the reason I don't know these things is because, you're right, Diana has built a life that doesn't include me. But it didn't happen overnight, Nicole. It took years of mutual pulling apart, years of unhad conversations and unresolved resentments. But you still love her." It wasn't a question. Nicole had seen the truth tonight, written in the way Stephen couldn't stop looking at Diana, how his voice softened when he spoke of their past traditions. Love isn't simple when you've been married for over 2 decades. Stephen reached for Nicole's hand, but she pulled it away. It's complicated by history and habit, and 1,000 small moments that accumulate into something that can't be easily disassembled. But can it be replaced? Nicole hated the desperate tone in her voice. Isn't that what you were trying to do with me? Use me to replace what you'd lost with her? No. Stephen shook his head vigorously. You're not a replacement, Nicole. You're new and different and don't carry all the baggage of our past. With you, I can just be Stephen, not the failed husband or the neglectful partner. You see me as who I want to be, not who I've become. The words should have been comforting, should have reaffirmed Nicole's value in his life. Instead, they sounded like a confession of selfishness, an admission that she had been chosen not for who she was, but for what she wasn't. She wasn't Diana, didn't carry the complications of decades of history, didn't demand the real vulnerability that came from truly knowing someone. Nicole opened the limousine door before the driver could get out to do so. The San Francisco night air hit her, cold and damp from the fog that was beginning to roll in from the ocean. She could feel the moisture on her skin, see it creating halos around the streetlights. "Nicole, wait." Stephen followed her out, his hand gently capturing her wrist. "Don't end the night like this. Come home with me. We can talk properly." "Your home?" Nicole turned to face him. "You mean the mansion you share with Diana? The one where Alessandro Monteverde is staying as her guest? That's the house you're inviting me to?" Stephen let his hand drop. "She won't be there. I heard her tell Margaret she was going to an after-event cocktail party." "Does that make it better?" Nicole felt something break inside her, some last thread of hope snapping. "You want to take me to your marital home while your wife is out? Put me in a room she probably decorated? Pretend for a few hours that you're a free man? How is this different from all the other stolen weekends, Stephen? When does this become real?" "It's real now. We are real." "Are we?" Nicole took a step back, creating space between them that felt both physical and metaphorical. "Because from my perspective, I spent the entire night being invisible while everyone adored your wife. I watched you watch her with an expression I've never seen when you look at me. I saw the future, Stephen, and there's no room for me in it." "You're reacting emotionally. Let the night settle, and then we can discuss this rationally." The condescension in his voice was the last straw. Nicole felt anger replace the hurt, a cleansing fury that burned through the confusion and self-doubt. "I don't need time to process what I saw tonight. I need you to be honest with me and with yourself. Do you want to leave Diana? Do you really want to? Or do you want to keep both of us? Have your respectable marriage for public events and your understanding mistress for private comfort?" "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Nicole crossed her arms, shielding herself against the cold and against the vulnerability of finally saying the words she'd avoided for 2 years. Then tell me when you're going to file for divorce. Not eventually or soon, or when the timing is better. Give me a real date, Stephen. When are you going to stop saying you're trapped and actually set yourself free? The silence that followed said everything. Stephen opened his mouth, closed it again, his eyes searching hers as if looking for an answer that didn't demand a real choice. The limousine waited behind him, engine purring softly, ready to take him back to his complicated life where wives and mistresses existed in separate compartments that were never meant to overlap. I thought so, Nicole said softly. She turned towards the building, her keys already in her hand. Nicole, please, don't do this. She stopped at the entrance, her hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, she said, I fell in love with the version of you that promised we were temporarily secret, not permanently hidden. I fell in love with the stories about how Diana had given up on the marriage, how you were just waiting for the right time to make it official. But tonight I realized those stories were just that. Stories. And I'm not sure if you were lying to me or to yourself. But either way, I deserve better. She pushed the door open and stepped into the lobby without looking back. Her heels echoed on the marble floor as she walked to the elevator, each step an effort of willpower. Part of her expected to hear Stephen follow, expected him to come after her with grand gestures and definitive promises. But when the elevator doors closed, she was alone, her reflection in the polished steel panels showing a woman in a silver dress who suddenly looked very fragile. On the 12th floor, Nicole unlocked her apartment and stepped into the darkness. She didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Down below, she could see the limousine still parked, Stephen standing beside it, looking up towards the building. She watched him check his phone several times, probably hoping she would call, that she would say she'd overreacted. Nicole left her phone in her purse, untouched. After 10 minutes, Stephen got back into the limousine. Nicole watched its taillights disappear into the rising fog, leaving only the city at night and the silent weight of decisions that could no longer be postponed. The silver dress suddenly felt too tight, the sequins digging into her skin like tiny accusations. She took it off and let it drop to the floor. Standing in her expensive lingerie in the darkened apartment, surrounded by the furniture she had chosen to impress a man who would never truly be hers. Her phone finally rang, the screen illuminating the inside of her purse. Nicole didn't need to check to know it was Stephen. She let it ring until it went to voicemail, then it rang again, then a third time. On the 4th call, she switched the phone off completely, choosing silence over more promises that would lead nowhere. Nicole's apartment remained dark for 3 days. She called in sick to work, claiming a severe flu, ignored worried texts from friends, and kept the blinds drawn against the Californian sun that insisted on shining over San Francisco as if the world hadn't fundamentally shifted. The silver dress remained where it had fallen, a pile of sequins on the bedroom floor as material evidence of her naivety. Stephen called 47 times in the first 24 hours. Nicole counted, watching her phone screen light up repeatedly with his name. Each call a silent plea she didn't have the energy to answer. Eventually the calls tapered off, reducing to text messages that began demanding, became supplicating, and finally took on the hurt tone of someone who believed they were being unfairly punished. On the morning of the 4th day, Nicole finally opened the blinds. Light flooded the apartment like water breaching a dam, revealing the state of neglect she had allowed to accumulate. Empty wine glasses dotted every surface. Takeout containers piled up on the kitchen counter. She had eaten very little, mostly surviving on strong coffee, and the occasional piece of toast her churning stomach could tolerate. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the damage of 72 hours of trauma processing. Deep shadows under her eyes, pale skin that hadn't seen sun, hair that desperately needed shampoo. Nicole turned the shower faucet as hot as she could stand and stood under the scalding spray until the water cooled, letting 2 weeks of illusions wash down the drain. When she emerged, wrapped in a soft cotton robe Stephen had given her last Christmas, she finally picked up her phone and scrolled through his messages. They told a story of their own, a narrative arc of denial, anger, bargaining, and something that almost resembled acceptance, but not quite. "We need to talk about this. You're overreacting." That was from the first few hours, when Stephen still believed he could manage the situation like he managed his business meetings, with logic and persistence. "Nicole, I understand you're upset, but running away solves nothing. It's me. We can get through this." That arrived on the second day, when irritation was beginning to bleed through his concern. "I made bad choices. I know that now. But what we have is real. Don't throw away 2 years over one difficult night." Day 3, when the bargaining began. And finally, this morning. Diana filed for divorce. She's with Alessandro. She was waiting to tell me until after the Alcatraz concert. "You were right about them. You were right about everything." Nicole read that last message 3 times, trying to decipher her own feelings about it. Should she feel validation? Triumph? Wasn't this what she had wanted? For the path with Stephen to finally be free of complications? Instead, she felt only a profound weariness and the uncomfortable realization that her victory was merely a byproduct of Diana's abandonment, not a genuine choice from Stephen. She typed and deleted 5 different replies before finally writing, "We need to talk. Not at your office or my apartment. Somewhere neutral. Golden Gate Park, near the Japanese tea garden. 2 o'clock. Stephen's reply arrived in seconds. "I'll be there. Thank you for giving me this chance." Nicole put on jeans and a simple wool blouse, deliberately casual compared to the armor of sophistication she usually wore to see Stephen. She tied her hair back in a loose ponytail, applied just enough makeup not to look sick, and grabbed a light jacket. The day was clear, the fog having burned off early, leaving San Francisco bathed in the golden light that made the city seem magical even during difficult conversations. The Uber ride to Golden Gate Park took 20 minutes through neighborhoods Nicole had explored with Stephen in better times. They had dined in the outer Sunset, walked along Ocean Beach at sunset, explored obscure bookstores in the Haight. All those memories now carried the weight of context. The understanding that while she was building a life with Stephen, he was simply taking a vacation from his real life. Stephen was already waiting when she arrived, standing near the entrance to the Japanese tea garden with his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He looked exhausted, and Nicole felt a pang of selfish satisfaction knowing that at least she wasn't the only one suffering. "You came," he said, as if there had been real doubt. "I said I would." Nicole maintained a distance between them, aware that physical proximity had always been Stephen's tool for avoiding difficult conversations. A touch, a kiss, and suddenly problems were pushed into the indefinite future. They began to walk along the park paths, passing families taking pictures, joggers with their headphones on, tourists consulting maps. The park was alive with the normal activity of a weekday, all these strangers living their lives oblivious to the drama unfolding between 2 silent walkers. "Diana confronted me the night of the ball," Stephen finally said. "After you left. After I got home. Alessandro was discreet, went to the guest room, but Diana was waiting for me in the living room with a bottle of wine and 23 years of unsaid things." Nicole listened, watching a squirrel climb a nearby redwood, its movements quick and decisive, uncomplicated by doubt or remorse. She told me she met Alessandro last year, exactly as Patricia mentioned. But it wasn't just a professional connection. They began a correspondence, long emails about art and music and philosophy. Diana said it was the first time in years anyone had truly seen her as something beyond Stephen Carmichael's wife. His voice broke slightly. She was so calm when she talked about it, so clear, as if she'd thought about every word for months. "And you?" Nicole asked. "What did you say to her?" Stephen stopped walking, turning to face Nicole directly. "I told her about you. There was no point in denying it, not after showing up with you publicly." She laughed, Nicole, not with anger or pain, just this sad, tired laugh. She said she'd known about you from the beginning, that our housekeeper had mentioned my strange hours, my frequent trips to Nob Hill. The knowledge settled in Nicole's stomach like a cold stone. Diana had known all along. While Nicole hid away in her apartment, feeling guilty, but justified because Stephen insisted the marriage was merely a formality, Diana had been aware of everything, choosing her response, crafting her exit. "She used me," Nicole said softly. "You used me. I was just a pawn in both your games." "No." Stephen reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "It wasn't like that. What I feel for you is real. It always was real. But it was never enough." Nicole felt tears threaten, but pushed them back through sheer stubbornness. "Not enough for you to be honest with me about the true state of your marriage. Not enough for you to admit that Diana had never emotionally let go of you. That you two were just dancing around each other, waiting to see who would blink first." They started walking again, entering a more densely wooded area where the path was shaded by eucalyptus trees that perfumed the air with their medicinal scent. Cyclists rode past periodically, their tires humming on the asphalt, their lives moving forward, while Nicole's seemed stuck in perpetual pause. "Diana wants a clean dissolution," Stephen continued. "No battle, no fight over property. She gets the Pacific Heights house and property in Carmel. I get the South Beach apartment and the Lake Tahoe house. We divide the investments equitably." She was generous, considering she would be entitled to much more. "Generous," Nicole repeated. "She's not being generous, Stephen. She's being strategic. She gets what she wants, Alessandro, without looking like the villain who destroyed a 23-year marriage. You get your guilt intact, and your mistress waiting in the wings. Everyone wins except the person who was honest about not being in a relationship." Stephen stopped again, his frustration finally showing. "What do you want me to do, Nicole? You complained I was married. Now I'm not. You said I was trapped. Now I'm free. But it's still not enough? Because you didn't choose this." The words exploded from her, 2 years of resentment finally finding voice. "Diana chose you. If she hadn't met Alessandro, if she hadn't decided she was ready to move on, you would still be in your dead marriage, and I would still be waiting in my apartment for scraps of your attention. You didn't break free, Stephen. You were let free. And there's a huge difference between those two things." The silence that followed was filled with the sounds of the park, children laughing in the distance, a bird singing somewhere above them, traffic murmuring from the nearby road. Stephen looked 10 years older in the filtered light, the creases around his eyes deeper, the gray strands at his temples suddenly looking less distinguished and more just tired. "So, what are you saying?" he asked finally. "That it's over? That everything we built means nothing because the timing was wrong?" Nicole thought carefully before answering. "I'm saying I don't know what we built anymore. I thought we were building a future together, but maybe you were just building an exit from a present you could no longer stand. And I don't want to be anyone's exit, Stephen. I want to be someone's choice." They had circled back towards the park entrance, their physical circuit mirroring the emotional one they had been traveling for 2 years. Nicole could see her Uber waiting where she had ordered it, the driver looking at his phone, unaware that he was waiting to transport the remains of a relationship that had been doomed from the start. "I'm not going to ask you to wait anymore," Nicole said. "I'm not going to give ultimatums or demand promises, but I need time, Stephen. Time away from you. Time to figure out who I am when I'm not the secret mistress, or the other woman, or whatever role I've been playing. I need to find out if there's still a Nicole underneath all of this." Stephen nodded slowly, defeated in a way she had never seen. "How long?" "I don't know. Maybe months. Maybe longer." Nicole walked towards the Uber, then stopped and turned one last time. "And Stephen, when you figure out who you are without Diana defining you by opposition, without me validating you by adoration, perhaps we'll meet again. But until then, we both need to learn to stand alone." She slid into the back seat of the car before he could reply, giving the driver her address in a voice that barely trembled. As they drove away, Nicole looked through the rear window and saw Stephen standing where she had left him, a solitary figure surrounded by the life that continued everywhere around him. The apartment was still messy when she returned, but somehow it felt less oppressive. Nicole spent the next afternoon cleaning, throwing out reminders of Stephen, packing away gifts he had given into boxes she stored in the guest room closet. She wasn't ready to discard them completely, but she also didn't need alters to their failed relationship occupying vital space. When she finished, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in layers of orange and pink that rivaled even Diana's red dress. Nicole stood at her window, watching the light change, and for the first time in days felt something beyond pain. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was possibility. The recognition that her life didn't end just because one version of it had. Her phone chimed with a message from a friend she hadn't seen in weeks, inviting her to dinner that weekend. Nicole typed yes before she could overthink it, then sent similar messages to others she had neglected during her relationship with Stephen. She had shrunk her world to fit into the spaces he could offer. It was time to expand it again. The following week, Nicole returned to work with renewed determination, accepting a project she had refused because it would have meant fewer evenings available for Stephen. She signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something she had always wanted to try but never made time for. She scheduled an appointment with a therapist specializing in relationship trauma. Stephen messaged occasionally, never pushing, just letting her know he was still there. Nicole replied politely but briefly, maintaining boundaries she had failed to establish before. Part of her still loved him, still wanted to believe they could find their way back to each other. But a larger part knew she first needed to find her way back to herself. 3 weeks after her last conversation with Stephen, Nicole woke to an unexpected message from an unknown number. "Hello, Nicole. This is Diana Carmichael. I know this might seem strange, but I'd like to talk to you, if you're willing. There are things I think you deserve to know." Nicole stared at the screen for 5 full minutes, her brain processing the unlikelihood of that message. The last person in the world she expected to hear from was the woman whose marriage she had helped complicate. Part of her wanted to delete the message, block the number, and pretend it had never happened. But another part, the part that still had unanswered questions about the last 2 years of her life, typed out a hesitant reply. Where and when? Diana's reply arrived in seconds. "Sausalito, Tomorrow? At noon? There's a little cafe near the docks that serves wonderful tea. Less likely, we'll run into people we know. Nicole agreed before she could question her own sanity. She spent the next night awake, imagining 1,000 different scenarios. Perhaps Diana wanted to confront her, to pour years of righteous anger onto the woman who had slept with her husband. Perhaps it was an elaborate trap, some kind of public vengeance. Or perhaps Diana simply wanted to look into the eyes of the person Stephen had chosen when novelty trumped history. The crossing of the Golden Gate Bridge the next morning was shrouded in characteristic San Francisco fog, the vibrant red of the towers fading into the whiteness, like ghosts of solid structures. Nicole drove her Honda Civic through the mist, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her stomach churning with anxiety. Sausalito emerged on the other side of the bridge like an impressionist painting. Colorful houses climbing the hills, yachts swaying gently in their docks. The cafe Diana had chosen was discreet, tucked away on a side street overlooking the bay. Nicole arrived 15 minutes early, but Diana was already there, sitting at a corner table by the window, dressed casually in linen pants and a simple cotton blouse. Without the red gown and dazzling jewels, she looked surprisingly normal, even approachable. "Nicole?" Diana rose when she saw her, but didn't extend a hand or make a move to hug her. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd refused." "Honestly, I still don't know why I agreed." Nicole slid into the opposite chair, aware of the waiter approaching with menus. They ordered tea, Diana choosing Earl Grey while Nicole opted for chamomile, hoping its calming properties would help her jangled nerves. The cafe was quiet, only a few other patrons scattered at tables, an elderly couple sharing scones, a woman working on a laptop, all oblivious to the improbable encounter happening in the corner. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked to meet." Diana stirred her tea meticulously, 3 times clockwise, a gesture that seemed rehearsed from years of tradition. "The truth is, I've been thinking a lot about you since the ball. About what Stephen must have told you, about what it must have been like for you that night." Nicole waited, unsure how to respond. "Stephen has a way of shaping narratives," Diana continued, her eyes meeting Nicole's with surprising intensity. "He always has. It's part of what makes him so successful in business. This ability to present things from the angle that best serves his purposes. I suspect the story of our marriage that he told you was very different from the reality." "He told me you had grown apart," Nicole admitted, her voice coming out more defensive than she intended. "That you shared a home, but not a real life." Diana let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's his version, I suppose. Convenient, clear, painting him as the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of his own isolation." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "The truth is, we spent years trying to make our marriage work. Couples therapy, weekend retreats, all the recommended interventions, but Stephen was married to his work long before he was married to me. I was a trophy wife when he was building his corporate image, and I became domestic furniture once he no longer needed external validation." The words carried the weight of decades, not the sharp bitterness of recent anger, but the weary sadness of someone who had made peace with old disappointments. Nicole felt something shift in her understanding, puzzle pieces finally finding their correct positions. "I'm not saying this to make you feel bad," Diana added quickly. "You didn't destroy our marriage, Nicole. It was broken long before you came along. But I want you to understand that Stephen wasn't entirely honest with you about our dynamic. He wasn't trapped in a dead marriage, waiting for the right exit. He was having the best of both worlds, respectable wife for public events and understanding girlfriend for emotional needs he couldn't meet within the marriage." Nicole felt tears prick, but refused to let them fall in front of this woman who had every right to hate her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I used to be you," Diana said simply. "Not exactly, but there are similarities. When I met Stephen, he was married to his work, building his first startup, living on caffeine and ambition. I thought I could be the one to save him from that lifestyle, that my love would be enough to make him choose balance. It took me years to realize that some people don't want to be saved. They want to be admired for how hard they work, so they don't need saving." The waiter returned with a platter of sandwiches Diana had ordered, small triangles of cucumber and smoked salmon arranged artfully. Nicole realized she hadn't eaten breakfast, but her stomach was still too roiled for food. "Alessandro is different," Diana said, and for the first time Nicole saw real vulnerability in her expression. "He sees me, not as someone's wife or an event planner or any other role I've played. He's interested in my thoughts, my opinions, the books I read, and the music that moves me. It's terrifying, honestly, to be truly seen after so long of merely being observed." "Do you love him?" Nicole asked, surprised by her own boldness. Diana considered the question thoughtfully. "I'm learning to love him, but more importantly, I'm learning to love the version of myself that exists when I'm with him. That's the difference, I think. With Stephen, I was always trying to be enough. With Alessandro, I already am." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the fog begin to dissipate over the bay, revealing the city of San Francisco across the water. Boats left white trails on the blue-gray surface, their destinations clear even as the paths curved and shifted. "Stephen loves you," Diana said finally. "In his limited way, he truly does love you. But his capacity for love is fundamentally shaped by the need for control. He loves you because you look at him with an admiration I stopped offering years ago. He loves you because you represent a fresh start, a blank slate without all the weight of his past failures." Nicole absorbed this, recognizing the truth in Diana's words. "So, you're saying I have no future with him?" "I'm saying you need to decide if you can love someone who needs admiration more than he needs partnership." Diana leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Stephen will never choose you in the way you want to be chosen, Nicole. He'll include you in his life on his terms, on his schedule, in the way that serves his needs. And you'll spend years wondering why your love isn't enough to change that." The words echoed Nicole's own realizations over the past few weeks, but hearing them from Diana solidified something inside her. This was no longer speculation or fear. It was reality confirmed by someone who had lived 23 years of the future Nicole was contemplating. "The divorce will be finalized next month," Diana continued. "Stephen will come to you, free and available, offering everything you said you wanted. But before you accept, I want you to ask yourself, do you want Stephen, or do you want the idea of what Stephen represents? Do you want the real man, with all his limitations, or do you want the fantasy you've built around him?" Nicole finally picked up one of the sandwiches, more to have something to do with her hands than from actual appetite. "Why do you care? Why help me when you slept with my husband?" Diana finished without malice. "Because I was angry with you for long enough. I was angry with myself, too, for all the signs I ignored, all the times I chose appearances over honesty. But eventually I realized that anger was just keeping me trapped in a marriage that was already over. You don't owe me anything, Nicole, but you owe yourself the truth." They finished their tea in a more comfortable silence, watching Sausalito fully wake up around them. Tourists began to fill the sidewalks, cameras in hand, looking for that perfect angle of the bridge and the city beyond. life continued in its beautiful normality, indifferent to the personal dramas being resolved in hidden little cafes. When they finally rose to leave, Diana touched Nicole's arm lightly. "One last thing. The concert on Alcatraz is next week. Stephen received his invitation, and I suspect he'll ask you to accompany him. A way to publicly demonstrate that you're together now that he's officially available. Whatever your decision about him, about you two, do it for the right reasons. Not out of pressure or guilt or the idea that you've invested too much time to give up now." Nicole nodded, not trusting her voice not to break. They walked out together into the sunlight that had finally burned through the fog. Two women linked by the same man, but separated by vastly different understandings of what it meant to be loved. On the drive back across the bridge, Nicole drove with new clarity. The fog had completely lifted now. The city spread before her in sharp, crisp detail. She could see the streets where she had walked with Stephen, the restaurants where they had dined, all the places that had created their geography of secret romance. But she could also see beyond them, to neighborhoods they had never explored together, possibilities they had never considered because their relationship had always existed in carefully circumscribed spaces. Her phone rang as she was parking near her apartment. Stephen, as if psychically attuned to the perfect timing to interrupt her revelations. "The divorce will be finalized on Friday. I'm free, Nicole. Finally, completely free. Have dinner with me this weekend. Let me prove I can be the man you always wanted me to be." Nicole stared at the message for a long time, Diana's words echoing in her mind. Do you want Stephen, or do you want the idea of what Stephen represents? It was a question she had avoided for 2 years, hiding behind justifications and promises, building fantasized futures that never had to confront the complicated reality of the present. She typed and deleted 3 different replies before finally writing, "I need more time. I'm not ready yet." His reply came quickly, a flurry of messages expressing confusion, frustration, the familiar demand to know how much time, when she would be ready, what else he needed to do to prove his commitment. Nicole read them all, recognizing the pattern Diana had described, the need to control the narrative, to manage the terms of engagement. She turned off her phone without replying and went up to her apartment, where the afternoon light streamed through the windows she had cleaned weeks ago. The space felt different now, no longer a sanctuary of waiting, but a real place where real life could happen. She had begun to fill it with her own things. Art she chose, without considering Stephen's taste. Books she wanted to read instead of impress with. Imperfect pottery from her classes that spoke of beginners trying something new without fear of failure. Nicole walked to the window and looked out at the city that had become the backdrop for her complicated love story. Down below, people were living their lives, making choices big and small that either moved them forward or kept them stuck. She thought of Diana, starting a new chapter with Alessandro, brave enough to leave a 23-year history in search of something more authentic. She thought of Stephen, stuck in patterns he had likely been repeating for decades, and she thought of herself, standing at this turning point, holding a future whose shape she finally understood she could choose. The invitation to the Alcatraz concert arrived 3 days later, not by message from Stephen, but by formal mail. A thick cream-colored envelope with her name written in elegant calligraphy, the kind of correspondence that belonged to a different era. Nicole opened it standing in her entryway, her fingers trembling slightly as she slid the paper knife under the sealed flap. "You are invited to an evening of music under the stars on Alcatraz Island. Maestro Alessandro Monteverdi will perform in an intimate concert benefiting the San Francisco Symphony. Saturday, May 15th at 7 o'clock in the evening. Formal attire. Ferry transport departing from Pier 33. There was no mention of Stephen, no suggestion of a +1. It was a singular invitation, addressed only to her, and Nicole understood immediately that it had come from Diana, not him. It was a test, perhaps, or an offer of closure, a chance to see the world she had almost stepped into before definitively deciding if she wanted to be a part of it. Nicole placed the invitation on the kitchen table and stared at it for an entire hour, the cream paper contrasting with the dark wood like an unanswered question. Her phone rang several times with messages from Stephen, each one more insistent than the last, demanding to know if she had received his invitation, if she would accompany him, when they would finally stop wasting time they could spend together. She didn't reply to any of the messages. Instead, she called her therapist and scheduled an emergency session. Dr. Patricia Morrison had an office in Russian Hill, a comfortable room with large windows overlooking the bay, and bookshelves laden with volumes suggesting decades of study into human complexity. Nicole had started seeing her 3 weeks ago, slowly unpacking the 2 years of her relationship with Stephen, examining the patterns that had led her to accept so little, while convincing herself she was getting everything. "So, Diana invited you," Dr. Morrison said, after Nicole explained about the invitation. "How does that make you feel?" Nicole considered the question, trying to separate the layers of conflicting emotions. Confused. Why would she invite me? Why would she risk having me there, when she could just exclude me completely? Perhaps the question is, why do you believe you deserve to be excluded? The question landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples that disturbed the carefully maintained surface of Nicole's understanding of her own history. I was the other woman. I slept with her husband. And do you believe that defines you? That this one mistake erases everything else about who you are? Nicole looked out the window, watching a sailboat glide across the bay, its white sails catching the wind, moving towards a horizon that always receded, always just beyond reach. I used to think I was doing something brave, choosing love even when it was complicated, but now I realize I was just hiding. Easier to be a secret lover than to take real risks for a real relationship. And now? What do you want now? The question echoed Diana's. Do you want Stephen? Or do you want the idea of what Stephen represents? Nicole had spent weeks avoiding that question, filling her days with work and pottery classes and dinners with friends, building a life that existed outside Stephen's orbit. But the question remained, waiting for an honest answer. I want to be chosen, Nicole said finally. Not as a consolation prize, or a substitute, or a convenient exit. I want to be someone's first choice, not the option that becomes available when other doors close. Dr. Morrison nodded, jotting something on her pad. And can Stephen give you that? Nicole thought of all the times Stephen had promised he was about to leave Diana, all the explanations about timing and business strategy and protecting investments. She thought of how he had looked at Diana at the gala, that gaze mixed with regret and longing and something dangerously close to love. She thought of how quickly he had come to her after Diana filed for divorce, not because he was finally ready to choose Nicole, but because he had lost the choice he truly wanted to make. No, she said, and for the first time she completely believed it. No, he cannot. Saturday arrived wrapped in the bay's characteristic fog, the kind that transformed San Francisco into a ghost city, where buildings appeared and disappeared like memories. Nicole put on a simple navy blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion, something elegant but not flashy, appropriate without being memorable. She wasn't going to the concert to make a statement. She was going for closure. Pier 33 was crowded with guests waiting for the special ferry, all dressed in formal elegance that seemed slightly incongruous against the industrial backdrop of the docks. Nicole recognized a few faces from the winter gala, though no one seemed to recognize her. She was just another face in the crowd, exactly as she had been that night, before Diana's red dress had changed everything. Stephen appeared 15 minutes before boarding, scanning through the crowd until his eyes landed on her. He navigated through the people with a determination she knew well, his expression mixing relief and something more complicated. "You came?" he said when he reached her side. "I thought maybe you wouldn't." "I almost didn't." Nicole kept her voice neutral, aware of the people around them who might be listening. "But Diana invited me, and I thought I owed her at least that much." "Diana?" Stephen frowned. "I sent your invitation. I thought we'd come together, finally public, finally free to be who we were always meant to be." Nicole looked at him, really looked, trying to see beyond the veneer of confidence and success to the man beneath. He was handsome, still, and charismatic in a way that drew people like gravity. But there was something fundamentally missing, some capacity to truly see himself or others without the distorted lenses of self-preservation. "We didn't come together, Stephen. I came alone." Before he could reply, boarding was announced. The crowd moved towards the ferry, an elegant wave of taffeta and wool and understated but expensive jewelry. Nicole allowed herself to be carried by the current, putting distance between herself and Stephen, finding a spot near the rail where she could watch the city shrink as they pulled away from the shore. Alcatraz emerged from the fog like something out of a sinister fairy tale, its concrete walls darkened by decades of salt spray and neglect. But today, it had been transformed, lanterns lining the paths, flowers arranged in urns that softened the brutality of the prison architecture. The prisoners' outdoor recreation yard had been converted into an impromptu concert hall, chairs arranged in a semicircle around a temporary stage, the bay shimmering beyond as a liquid backdrop. Diana was near the stage when Nicole disembarked from the ferry, talking with Alessandro and a group of symphony patrons. She wore emerald green tonight, the color making her dark eyes almost luminous. When she saw Nicole, she excused herself from the conversation and walked over to her with a grace that seemed as natural as breathing. "You came," Diana said, echoing Stephen's words but with an entirely different intonation. There was no possessive surprise in her voice, only genuine pleasure. "I'm glad. It means a lot that you accepted the invitation." "Why did you invite me?" Nicole asked directly. "After everything, why include me in this?" Diana looked out at the bay, at the city shimmering through the distant fog. "Because I spent 23 years of my life trapped in a narrative someone else wrote about me. I didn't want to do the same to you. You deserve the chance to write your own ending, Nicole, not just accept what Stephen decided it should be." Before Nicole could reply, Alessandro announced that the concert was about to begin. Guests moved to their seats, Nicole finding hers near the middle, strategically positioned neither too close nor too far from the stage. Stephen was several rows behind, she noticed, surrounded by executives from his company. Separated, as Diana had arranged, giving them both space to experience the evening on their own terms. The music began as the sun started to set, painting the sky in layers of orange and purple that rivaled anything nature had produced before. Alessandro conducted with a passion that transformed notes into pure emotion, his entire body engaged in the act of creating beauty. The orchestra responded like an extension of his own soul, each instrument contributing to something greater than its individual parts. Nicole closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, all decisions and doubts and fears temporarily suspended. Here on this island that once held prisoners, surrounded by water that symbolized both separation and possibility, she felt something release within her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of an understanding that her story with Stephen was just a chapter, not the whole book. During the intermission, wine and canapés were served. Nicole accepted a glass of Chardonnay and stood near the edge of the courtyard, watching the fog begin to roll across the Golden Gate. The bridge was partially obscured now, its iconic red towers disappearing and reappearing like lighthouses through the whiteness. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" A voice beside her. Alessandro, holding his own wine glass, his tuxedo impeccable despite the physical energy of conducting. The way the fog transforms everything. One moment you see clearly, the next it's all hidden. But the city is still there, waiting to be rediscovered. Nicole smiled faintly. Is that a metaphor? Everything is a metaphor when you spend your life creating art. He smiled back. Diana told me about you, about your situation with Stephen. I hope you don't mind. Why would I mind? Everyone in San Francisco probably knows by this point. Perhaps, but there's a difference between gossip and understanding. Alessandro paused, choosing his words carefully. Diana spent years feeling invisible, watching the man she loved choose everything but her. When we met, she wasn't looking for romance. She was looking for someone who would see her as a whole human, not just a role to play. And you see her? Nicole said. It wasn't a question. I try. Every day, I try to truly see her, to listen to her, to honor her as a person separate from my own needs and desires. He looked across the courtyard to where Diana was laughing with a group of donors, her face animated in a way that suggested genuine joy, not social performance. It's not always easy. Real relationships never are. But it's honest. The second half of the concert was even more powerful than the first. Alessandro conducting pieces that ranged from melancholic to triumphant, each one telling a story without words. Nicole felt tears slip down her face during a particularly moving movement. Not from sadness, but from catharsis, the kind of emotional release that comes from finally letting go of something you've held onto for too long. When the last note faded over the water, the ovation was instantaneous and enthusiastic. Alessandro bowed deeply, then extended his hand to Diana in the audience. She walked onto the stage beside him, and together they accepted the applause, their fingers intertwined, their love obvious and unapologetic. Nicole watched Stephen watching from the back, his expression unreadable in the fading light. He seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than he had always appeared in his carefully controlled world. Here, surrounded by people who had chosen authenticity over appearances, who celebrated love that evolved instead of love that remained stagnant, he was out of place. The ferry ride back to the mainland was quieter, guests processing the experience as San Francisco grew larger through the fog. Nicole stood at the bow, letting the wind mess up her carefully arranged hair, no longer concerned with keeping up appearances. Stephen found her as they were, almost back at Pier 33. Can we talk? Really talk? Not just you avoiding me? Nicole turned to face him, watching all the future she had imagined with this man dissolve like the fog around them. What is there to talk about, Stephen? Do you want me to say it's okay? That we can start fresh now that you're free? Do you want me to forget the past 2 years, all the lies and half-truths, and pretend this is the happy ending it was always meant to be? They weren't lies. My marriage to Diana was over long before you came along. Perhaps, But you never told me it was over, because you two had grown in different directions, learned to respect each other even without romantic love. You told me she had abandoned him, that you were trapped and lonely, that I was your sole source of happiness. You made me feel responsible for your emotional well-being, Stephen, and that wasn't fair. The pier lights were visible now, tourists still wandering Fisherman's Wharf despite the late hour, street vendors selling souvenirs that captured a sanitized version of San Francisco's history. Nicole thought of all the stories this city held, all the lives lived in its steep neighborhoods, all the loves that bloomed and withered against the backdrop of its iconic views. "So that's it?" Stephen asked, his voice carrying genuine incomprehension. "You're just going to give up on what we have?" "I'm not giving up on anything. I'm choosing something different." Nicole picked up her purse, preparing to disembark. "Choose,"